Miami. A dozen high school students working for Americans for Prosperity, the conservative political network funded by Charles G. and David H. Koch, fanned out across the Little Havana neighborhood one day last week to make the case that the Republican tax bill was something to get excited about. "We believe it's time to fix our broken tax code and let families keep more of what they earn," Barbara D'Ambrosio, a sophomore, dutifully told an elderly woman who answered the door in her slippers. After she finished her script, Barbara glanced up from the iPad she was carrying and asked if the woman would kindly call her senators to urge them to support the tax bill, which was hours away from being approved by the Senate. The woman stared at her silently for a moment. Then she nodded, politely but unconvincingly. So Ms. D'Ambrosio and her friends soldiered on, visiting about 40 houses that afternoon and finding more of the same, people who were often unenthusiastic, unaware, or simply uninterested. It's the trickle-down theory of selling tax cuts to the American voter. Conservative activist groups like Americans for Prosperity, celebrating what they expect is the imminent passage of a tax package that they and the Republican Party's corporate backers have sought for a generation, now need to convince ordinary Americans that this is good for them too. These groups have marshaled their resources in almost every state in a campaign that can sound at times as if it were something a Democrat dreamed up, complete with tributes to the American worker and the middle class. The American people have waited 31 long years to see our broken tax code overhauled, the leaders of the Cox political network insisted in a letter to members of Congress on Monday, urging swift approval of final legislation. They added that the time had come to put more money in the pockets of American families. The problem, as Republicans are learning, is that most Americans do not believe that is what the tax plan will do. Steve Schmidt, a Republican strategist, said that amid all the talk about the need to score an important victory for their party, it bears mentioning that the win is something that is extraordinarily unpopular with 75% of the American people. The tax proposal seems ill-fitting for the mood on the right, perhaps explaining some of the skepticism. It would add $1 trillion to the deficit, according to the official congressional scorekeeper, contradicting the calls for fiscal austerity that conservatives made for years under President Barack Obama. And its generosity to corporations and the wealthiest Americans is at odds with the soak-the-rich economic populism President Trump preached during his campaign. But for groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, those in the Koch's vast network and others closely aligned with the pro-business wing of the Republican Party, the tax bill would be the only tangible legislative achievement after 11 months of an uneasy and, so far, unproductive alliance with a president they fiercely resisted during last year's election. The legislation is among the most unpopular public policy initiatives taken up by Congress in recent years, polling shows.